90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we're going to learn about finding a job in a law firm after COVID, and we'll include other types of professional firms. My special guest is Steve Goldmintz. He's a vice president with Marcum Search, an executive recruiting consulting firm with offices on Long Island, New York City, and around the country. Marcum Search is a national recruiting firm providing search, recruiting, and staffing services for law firms and accounting firms. Steve, welcome back to Law You Should Know.
Thank you, Ken. And of course, Marcum Search has a variety of disciplines in addition to the professional services that you mentioned. So thank you for highlighting that.
And I do want to mention that they also sponsor the Marcum Challenge, which is on August 2nd. And it's a chance for the employees of Marcum Search to give back and work for charity,
as well as hundreds of other local Long Island firms for a variety of charities.
Okay, and it's good, the charitable work that you and they do. In terms of, as we emerge from COVID, Steve, I know you've placed lawyers and accountants and many others for years. What types of jobs will be most available in law firms after COVID?
Probably what is a constant, COVID or not, is that there's always a need for legal secretaries. So, we're not going to pretend to have a great expertise in placing lawyers, but there's always a need for those support personnel, especially legal secretaries. Now, concurrent to COVID propelling itself around our country, what has grown are technology roles in law firms, support positions, intellectual property, cryptocurrency. So it has become an education for the legal community to keep up with the technology that has advanced itself.
And let's talk about legal secretaries for a minute. Secretaries are extremely valuable and help the lawyers and law firms do a better job and be more productive. But what skills are employers looking for in the legal secretary of the 21st century? I'm sure stenography is a lesser involved skill than other things.
I think we look at the most, and I hear this time and time again, besides the skills, is stability. No job hopping. And I asked a number of our recruiters around the country the same question, as well as some of the attorneys that are at Marcum LLP, our parent company. They all said the same thing: no job hopping. Because by definition, a legal secretary is a legal secretary. If it says legal secretary, we know what you do.
And in terms of support people, are there any specifics? Is it public relations? Is it computer technology? Is it being a paralegal? Any specific titles or skills that come to mind?
Well, I think every company certainly needs support personnel. We've learned that from a sister company called Marcum Technology. They send technologists out to companies, including to law firms, as well as to other businesses around the country. But what do they still need to do with the law firms? Well, to get back to the legal secretary for a moment, you still need to do the e-filing, the calendaring, pleadings, some of the paralegal work. But I think some attorneys can do some of the paralegal work these days.
And a good legal secretary sometimes also acts as a paralegal. And as you said, the filing and getting in proper format and accepted by the courts or the agency is just so important and can be a time-consuming job to the lawyer. And that's why it might be done by someone else in the firm.
Right. So that's a constant.
And how will, as we emerge from COVID, how will working remotely evolve, for lawyers and some of these other support people you mentioned?
Well, again, technology has evolved. And so you can probably see things going on via a Zoom environment. I don't know if depositions can be taken by Zoom.
They are at the moment. They're going by Zoom. Yeah. Whether it will continue, time will tell.
But the other back office positions that you might see, that we definitely see, and we see this in the recruiting field, we see operations roles at law firms. We definitely see business development roles as we emerge from COVID. and companies start ramping up and law firms start ramping up, we've seen business development roles, which also deals with marketing, putting together the marketing presentations so that the business development people could then bring in new clients, whether it's in intellectual property or in any other area.
And is that something that lawyers can evolve to, is marketing or business development, if they have those PR skills or that personality or perhaps the client connections?
Usually when a hiring manager sees the word attorney or lawyer or law school on a resume, what I've heard is that they usually believe that that person wants to be a lawyer. So even though they may be leaning towards public relations or some new areas, which we'll get to in a minute, it's always not necessarily a red flag, maybe a yellow flag that really they want to be a lawyer. I mean, they've invested in law school. Of course, it does help to have worked at a law firm if you're going to be doing business development or even professional services. That is transferable to work from an accounting firm to a law firm in business development.
And sometimes they want to use a different part of their brain, but they know the clients and they understand how the law firm can be of help to those clients, the nuts and bolts of that legal work. In terms of what does the future look like for what fields do you think will be especially hot for new and also experienced attorneys as we move beyond COVID?
It's very interesting that recently we've seen a number of companies, and specifically law firms, and even more specifically big law firms, suddenly embrace the job title of what we used to call diversity, which then became diversity and inclusion, which then became diversity, equity, and inclusion, which then became diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and now includes diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. And I'm sure as we evolve in a post-COVID world, we'll come up with other things that we protect. I mean, there is something called the Crown Act, which prevents discrimination based upon somebody's hair. And so there are other areas here where we generally have to accept people. And that's basically what the entire area is.
I know in terms of diversity and representation from all groups, many law firms, including top shelf law firms, are interested in that. So someone who is able to go get a legal education and fits those criteria may have even more opportunities available to them.
Well, there are some certifications specifically in the field of diversity, but keep in mind, we are all diverse. We're all part of the diverse universe.
As people submit information to you, they want to be placed for a job, or how important is the old-fashioned resume, or perhaps cover letter too?
A cover letter needs to be brief, get right to the point. I've been referred to you by Ken Landau or whomever, or I see that you're interested in this, I'm interested in that also.
Should it mention one or two special credentials or connections to help have some flashing lights go off?
Okay. Well, not necessarily bells and whistles. But certainly, what a job hunter needs to do is certainly do your research. What areas does the particular firm have of interest? You know, if it's a law firm, what are they in? Do they do construction law, etc.?
It's not good to send out an old boilerplate cover letter or resume. That's so old school, and that defeats the purpose.
I think a hiring manager can probably see through that, but certainly it does a candidate. It's to their benefit to make sure that they can hone in on something that the company needs. You need this, I can provide this.
And especially if their resume or cover letter are being screened by a machine as opposed to a human being, it's very important that the document have the right buzzwords. Is that a real trend? Just tell us, is that important? And in general, is it important to have as many buzzwords in that resume as possible?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are some companies that just get thousands upon thousands of resumes every week. So they've had to rely on these pre-screening type of machines. I don't know if I would call it artificial intelligence. That's certainly a part of the evolution that we may be in the next few years. And then again, there may be buzzwords that kick your resume out that might not be important to the company.
So what kind of information or words might kick the resume out?
Well, if the position calls for, the job description says we need somebody to climb a pole with their left hand, you should not be a pole climber with a right hand.
So you want to track the description as much as you can. Make sure those words, terms, skills, competencies are in your resume.
Yeah, definitely. If it's in the job description, put it there. Yeah, certainly as a job hunter, go through the job description, do a self-analysis line by line. I can 100% do this. I can do this. I don't necessarily have this. Maybe I should address it somehow, get what they say, get the elephant out of the room. But of course, you certainly focus on that which the hiring manager wants to hear.
Well, you want to make it to the next stage. So you want to get through this screening process, whether by a human or by a machine, and so that you're considered for the next stage. And we'll come to that in a moment. But tracking the language and the ad and the notice are important to get through that next stage.
The next stage, you're correct, is important. How do you get there? It's always important. It's always a challenge. It's always a challenge for a job prospect, a job hunter. And there's no magic key that I can think of.
But it helps to have the information in the resume and in perhaps a cover letter too, to get through that screening process or get the attention of the person looking at.
And sometimes it's also good not to tell everything in your first interview or your first conversation or in the cover letter. Kind of like peeling an onion, go through it layer by layer so that as the hiring manager learns more and more about you, they become more and more interested in learning more. Let them ask the questions.
And what would be too much information too early on?
Tell them everything on the first date.
Okay. I'd like to remind our listeners we're talking about finding a job in a law firm after COVID, and the information may apply to other professional firms as well. Our guest is Steve Goldmintz. He's a vice president at Marcum Search, an executive recruiting consulting firm on Long Island and in New York City and across the country. And as I mentioned before, Marcum Search is a national recruiting firm providing search, recruiting, and staffing services for law firms and accounting firms. What are some of the next steps toward, can a candidate do anything else to try to get an interview or try to get to the next step while they submit their resume and cover letter or after they've submitted it? There's a phone call, some kind of contact,
some sort of casual follow-up, of course. You don't want to stalk somebody. You don't want to go around them. You don't want to go over their head. But, keep in mind that some of these hiring managers, especially at big firms, I don't just mean big law firms, but big corporations, they certainly have a 15-minute window and then it's next. So, in an 8-hour day, you're going to see them go through 36 to 32, candidates probably.
And what would the next step be? Is that a 15-minute phone or Zoom interview?
Well, a Zoom interview is usually more than 15 minutes. The first one might be, but then as you get into the hiring managers and the other people that might be in the department, for example, in the business development role, you're going to meet with the marketing people, the marketing team. You're going to meet with the people that actually do the actual work, and that might be a whole hour. So again, don't reveal everything in the first 2 minutes.
Now, someone comes to you, you're trying to find the best candidates and you want to submit a number of candidates to your client. How are you going to help that person to, with their resume, with their demeanor, prepare them for the interview or the next step? And also decide if they're a good fit for your client.
Well, yeah, of course, certainly we want to find out if there's some intangibles there, such as somebody's personality, something that is not on the resume. The resume certainly does have to match the job description. And at the very least, it has to be honest. We're going to scope out if there are holes in it. Certainly, of course, we do background checks on candidates to make sure that, the dates on the resume are correct. And then the job titles match up. And then, of course, there are areas that, should be on the resume. If it's a litigation position, that's always hot. So we want to make sure that the resume does talk about, litigation.
And you're going to make sure that the resume is a good reflection of them. It's good. You're going to make sure it's accurate, but perhaps the candidate left some important stuff off the resume. So you're going to help them balance it out so that they can make it to the next step and be considered for a position.
Yes, that's true. We were reviewing candidates the other day for a position, again, in diversity and inclusion, and the candidates certainly had that, but it was buried in the resume amongst all of their other skills that they did in human resources. So certainly, of course, we're going to help them exploit that, but not exaggerate it.
And are there other experiences or skills that might be valuable to a person or valuable to an employer or valuable getting through the interview process?
We think that it's okay if they're an interesting person. I think, we want the interviewer to walk away with saying, that was an interesting person. I want to know more about that person. Not about their skill set. I want to know what they do and what television shows they watch or something like that.
And that's the employer wants a well-rounded person too, that will play well with others, that will get along with clients and coworkers.
Well, yes, of course, that's always true. I'm not a big fan of the word fit, but sometimes that word is thrown around again.
And what if the candidate doesn't have all the skills? Is 3 out of 4 or 90% proposition, or there are certain must-haves versus certain optional, or 3 out of 4?
I guess it depends upon the level. On a lower level, we always talk about the word potential with people. We have a law firm that needs a marketing assistant, for example, or a creative person, or a digital creative person. If they've had some experience in there, they're going to learn new technologies on the job. So yes, there are some room for growth, and it's up to the employer to see what the potential might be in the candidate that is sitting across the table from them.
And what about their social media presence or things along that line, or the things they can do to enhance it, or there are things that they should do to clean it up or not do in the first place?
Well, social media, of course, can be a kiss of death for a number of people. We're not supposed to, look at what somebody looks like, but yet people might be turned off if they see somebody like, with a beer in their hand, for example.
It includes party photos as opposed to professional programs they've given or been part of.
But definitely, of course, have an interesting background besides just your regular skill set.
Is charity work part of it? Being a well-rounded person, or just having other interests or showing other interests online?
Well, it's certainly not a negative factor. And, sometimes you put a charity on there. It might be a charity that is near and dear to the heart of the interviewer or to their family. Perhaps it's the Harry Chapin Food Bank, and you say, oh, I'm familiar with that, or I'm familiar with World Hunger Year.
And it's also a good opportunity for networking. Whenever you do a charity event, you're doing it to do good, but it's a way to meet other people, and you never know who you might meet there or who's on their board.
I'm a big believer in networking. It's certainly helped in my business. It's something that to this day we still have networking groups that we are part of. I meet with one every 2 weeks in New York City, and they come from all different disciplines. And for example, one law firm that sits on this committee, he needed a matrimonial assistant because they were overworked in that specific field.
And is specialization, is that important to assistants in a law firm?
Well, there are a lot of new and hot areas for attorneys. Like I said before, litigation is always hot. Digital asset planning is certainly a new area. You were asking about new areas before. Planning with cryptocurrency, a word that we hear a lot about, these days. And that's on the hot side. So what's on the downside? Well, possibly because of COVID, which is what started this conversation. Corporate law positions were downsized, but that was probably because of across the board downsizing that happened at major corporations, without naming names.
And throughout the process, there's some other tough or difficult questions that job candidates should be prepared to answer?
What you want to do is, if you're working with a recruiter and working with a Marcum search recruiter, the recruiter is going to prep you with some basic questions, typical questions, do's and don'ts as far as what you should be answering. You always want to, at the end of, or what seems to be the end of the interview, you always want to say, what's the next step for me in your process? And you want to make sure that you know that answer, because your recruiter, when you debrief with them, the recruiter is going to ask you, how did you leave it? What did they tell you was the next step for you in the process?
Should you also ask if, toward the end of the interview, is there anything else I haven't covered or you'd like to hear about? Just to see if there's some skill that didn't come up that maybe that's important to them. Yeah.
A question that sometimes we can tell people to ask is, have I answered all of your questions? Is a good answer. Is there something about me that would not make me a fit for your job? And maybe that's a polite question, because I think an interview is either going to be brutally honest or they're going to be very polite.
And if there's something that they think you're missing, maybe they have it wrong, or you didn't convey all the information in your prior answers or on paper.
That certainly does open the door for you to fix something that may have happened. Now, when we debrief candidates as a recruiting firm, we ask a candidate, is there a particular question that perhaps you did not handle well, that you feel wasn't handled well, or that you forgot to touch on a major point? In this way, when we then circle back with the client company, we say, when you spoke to, X, Y, and Z candidate, they forgot to mention this. So I wanted to bring that up to you.
And you can help fill in the gap. And what are some other good questions that are good for them to ask at an interview?
We always have our candidates say, where do you see the position going? We like the candidate to ask the hiring manager, how did you get to this position? So that this way you're establishing a one-on-one relationship with the hiring manager, because hiring is still personal. Even though the skill set has to be there, you want to be able to bond with the hiring manager, show that you have an interest in them. Of course, if you do your research before the interview, you already know some of the answers to that question. You know that they went to, Nassau County Community College.
And I guess it's good to look at the firm's website and perhaps ask some questions about what direction they're moving in.
Well,
to show that you've done that.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to show that you've done your homework. Don't get caught by surprise. Know the company, know the organization chart, know what the areas of interest are, in the legal profession or in any business. Know where they're going. You're correct. Know where they're going. Know where they've been.
Anything else you think they should do to prepare for that interview besides the help you're going to give them, doing their research, cleaning up their social media?
Well, of course, during an interview, please don't chew gum. You remember your second grade teacher said, you look like a cow. Don't chew that gum.
And what about the length of answers to questions? Is it good to stop after a minute? Is it good to say, is there anything more you'd like to hear about, or do you want me to expand on it, or just ramble on and on? Oh,
well, there's the word rambling you don't want to do. Certainly try to avoid yes or no answers, and never say maybe, I guess. But of course, try not to reveal everything. Leave something for the next follow-up question. Demonstrate that there's an interest. Let them follow up with you.
And do you see the nature of interviews changing in the near future?
Well, of course, we've seen this changing in the COVID environment with remote interviews. There have been less and less of in-person type interviews. There have been some Zoom interviews. There's been hiring where the hiring manager never even met the person, or maybe they met them at the last moment in the process. So yes, COVID certainly helped. And of course, remote can be a plus or a minus, for a candidate. I think the minus side can be that you're not necessarily sitting at the knee of somebody that you could learn from. I don't mean literally, but you always like to hear stuff come through the office walls so you can learn a little bit about it. And, in recruiting, I used to learn things from the other recruiters that were there.
Okay. Well, it's good that you exchange information with them. I'd just like to remind our listeners, you're listening to Law You Should Know. Our guest is Steve Goldmintz. He's a vice president of Marcum Search with offices on Long Island and in Manhattan and around the country. He helps place accountants and lawyers to various firms. As you've heard, the different steps he helps them with, and so that they are good fits for his companies and clients. He's been with Marcum Search for 9 years and is a vice president from the Manhattan office. And Marcum Search has recruiters, nationally. Steve, do you invite lawyers or accountants to contact you if they're looking for another job, a better fit? Can you help them match up a better situation and also get them ready to do their best in an interview?
Okay. Recruiting. Recruiting is an active verb, and it's a client-driven business. So the client tells us what to look for, and that invokes the colloquial term of head hunting. They want us to find someone that is an expert, perhaps in litigation, let's say, or in operations, or in office management, or in marketing. But if we just suddenly get, a resume from someone, as talented as they may be, they may be a CFO. And keep in mind, Marcum Search is going to place a lot of CFOs and controllers and financial managers from time to time, or almost every day. And it may not be the right person. They may be geographically in the wrong part of the country, or maybe their salary expectations are not within what our client has said might be within their budget.
But do you welcome inquiries from possible candidates? So even if you don't have something now,
of course,
you might have something for them down the road.
Yeah. If somebody does have an interesting resume, they seem to be good and qualified. Naturally, of course, we are going to talk to them, and that same is true across the board. All of our recruiters take part of the day to talk with interesting people. I don't like to say that we warehouse the resumes, but there are a lot of resumes in our database that we probably haven't spoken to, in a few months, just because the right job hasn't come up for that particular person.
And you're looking to have the right fit. Steve, do you want to give us contact information or a website for Marcum Search? They can find out more about Marcum.
Okay. Marcum is Marcum, marcumsearch.com/jobs. You can find what current jobs we are working on. Contact information. Phone numbers are here on Long Island, 631 area code 414-4000. Long Island again is 631-414-4000. And in New York City, Manhattan, or anywhere around the country, it's area code 212-485-5500. Again, that's 212-485-5500. Marcum Search.
Steve, any very brief final thought to give our job candidates or attorneys or accountants out there?
Well, of course, Marcum Search offers a number of other services just besides recruiting. We do staffing, which encompasses temp hiring. We have an IT recruiting division, which also services Marcum Technology. And we have a team that does what's called Berkman, Birkman, Berkman testing for clients.
Okay. And do you also place people in temporary positions, be
Yes.
they accountants, support staff, or lawyers?
Yes. I wouldn't say lawyers so much, but definitely, of course, support personnel.
Okay. I would like to thank Steve Goldmintz of Marcum Search for being our guest on Law You Should Know. If you'd like to tell someone else about this broadcast or program, the podcast is available at nccradio.org. And this is Ken Landau, your host. Please join us again next week for another program on Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York.